Hey guys, Pete here. Today I'm going to do a video about the biggest questions I have after the Better Call Saul Season 5 finale. Season 5 just wrapped up and it did a fantastic job of setting up the 6th and final season. It seems a little crazy to say that in a prequel show where we already know the ending to many of the main characters' stories, that there are a lot of burning questions I want answers to. Before we get into them, this is your spoiler warning. This video is not something you'll want to watch if you aren't caught up with Better Call Saul through the Season 5 finale and the entire run of Breaking Bad and El Camino. You've been warned. Better Call Saul Season 5 started out doing what was expected after Jimmy McGill got his license to practice law reinstated at the end of Season 4. He officially changed his name to Saul Goodman, and using the contacts he built up selling burner phones, started his new practice in criminal law. He wasn't exactly the guy we knew from Breaking Bad yet, but all the pieces were in place for him to get there. While he was doing this, his partner Kim Wexler was by his side. And while he was dipping into this new world, Kim was continuing on her path of a budding legal career she'd built up. The biggest question everyone had was what is going to happen to Kim? We don't learn much about Saul's personal life during the Breaking Bad series, but he doesn't seem like the same guy as when Kim's in his life. The general assumption is that she's just not around anymore at that time. By the end of Season 5, things have changed. Kim and Jimmy got married. Jimmy went to work for the cartel. Doing a job for them, he got stranded in the desert after being caught in a shootout, which was a really violent scene that had a major effect on him. And during his time away, in an attempt to figure out what was going on, Kim made herself known to his cartel client. So in the season finale, we saw a different side of Kim, where she presents this idea of going after Howard Hamlin so they can advance the Sandpiper settlement, which will get Jimmy about $2 million. So the biggest question I have after Season 5 is what's going on with Kim. After the Season 5 finale, when I was working on my recap video, I wasn't entirely sure about Kim's motivations in bringing up the idea of going after Howard. They got to that point in a roundabout way. First, Jimmy gives a half-hearted attempt to separate from Kim in order to protect her. She senses that he's going in that direction, and she tries to fix the situation. Over dinner, they're just sort of playfully talking about what happened with Howard at the courthouse and how they could do something to get back at him. And that progresses until Kim brings up this big idea. So that's where the confusion comes in. Did this start off innocently enough? She was just trying to be there for her partner, bring him out of this funk where he wants to leave? Or is this an idea that she's had and she was just waiting for the right moment to spring it? Rhea Seehorn, who plays Kim, and Bob Odenkirk, who plays Jimmy McGill, did a great interview on Entertainment Weekly's website, and the takeaway from that is that we're not supposed to know. Their final scene where she walks away from the bed and he looks kind of stunned and she does the finger guns, that's all very intentional. So the question is, what does it all mean? Does it mean in that moment that Kim has just decided to break bad? Or is it pointing out the fact that there's more under the surface that we just don't know about Kim's past? The next question I would have is, what will Lalo do next? He survived this attempt on his life. He lost people that he cared about in that. He was probably able to buy himself a little bit of time in having the assassin call the middleman and tell him the job was done. We have to imagine that'll get out to Gus, and for a little while at least he'll think that Lalo's dead. I think he's going to figure out that it was Gus right away. I mean, he told the guy that he knew who hired him. And I think he's saying Gus when he says that. That's who he's butted heads with. And so what would his next move be? I think it's reasonable to expect that he's going to return to Albuquerque. And I also think that it's reasonable that he's going to look up Jimmy and Kim, and they're going to be part of whatever he's planning. And I'm guessing this attempt on his life is going to take that Cold War that he's been in with Gus and make it into a hot one. And that's pretty crazy to think about. Speaking of Gus, another big question I have is, are we going to learn what happened in Chile? We heard a couple of mentions of Santiago this season, and we had the return of Herr Schuler, and so I am guessing that we'll learn some answers about Gus's history. The next question I have, is there any chance for Nacho to get out of this? I mean, the first part is, can he get out of Mexico? Can he get himself away from Lalo's hacienda? It seems pretty unlikely. There is a possibility that there are vehicles or a driver that were left behind after the assassins were killed. Otherwise, he's going to get hunted down by Lalo, and then the question becomes, is he more valuable to Lalo alive when he finds out that he has connections to Gus? We've always wondered if Nacho was going to be able to get his dad out alive, and now the question is more of, is Nacho going to live to see another day? Another big question I have is how much time will pass in season 6? At this point, we know for certain that there's more than 4 years until the two shows' timelines overlap. We always assumed that Better Call Saul would end right before the events of Breaking Bad started, or there would be considerable overlap of the timelines at the end of Better Call Saul. Where we're at now, that doesn't seem nearly as important as it used to. As mentioned, all the pieces are in place for Jimmy to be the Saul character. The only thing that's left is his relationship with Kim. Now that she's made a turn and they're going to be doing something big together, it really makes me wonder if there's going to be a big time jump or if it's going to end and then that is when the time jump would happen. I'm not considering Gene in that at all though, because Gene is a whole different question. How much time do we actually think we're going to spend with Gene? That's another assumption that fans have had, was that in wrapping up Gene's story, which I definitely think they'll do, a lot of fans thought that they would have full Gene episodes that take place in that timeline. At this point, what happens to Gene is one of the biggest mysteries left to answer. I don't think they can do that in a single teaser at the beginning of the season, nor would it make sense to answer that question at the beginning of the season in most scenarios. So, will there be a lot of Gene time, or is that something they can just wrap up in a couple of short sequences? When we talk about timelines and how much time is going to pass, another question I would have is, will season 6 have any major cameos from Breaking Bad characters? I think there's a distinct possibility that they might bring Hank and Gomi back, their connection to Crazy 8, Crazy 8's connection to the cartel story. There's definitely room to bring them in a meaningful way. Most people wonder if Walter White or Jesse Pinkman will show up. I'm not really sure. The showrunner Peter Gould has said on numerous occasions since El Camino came out, it took the pressure off Better Call Saul. In other words, it didn't need to show them because they had one more scene in El Camino. He brings up two important points, and I think this is how they'll decide. The first is they're telling the story of Jimmy's transformation, so if using Jesse or Walt would serve that story, then they would think about doing it. In other words, they're not really thinking about bringing them in for just a passing cameo. The other thing he seems to mention is that how busy those two actors are, and even if they wanted to do it, it may not be possible. So I think it's actually pretty unlikely that Walt and Jesse will show up, but I would still love to see it. And I know people say, oh, it's just fan service if it's a random cameo, but I would still probably jump up from my chair and cheer if I saw them pull up at the car wash and we just see Walt doing his thing working there. That said, I do think we'll see more cameos from Breaking Bad characters. They always seem to have a couple. The only one that I think is really essential would be Kubi. He's an important character in Saul's story in Breaking Bad. I think they wanted him to come back this season, but they weren't able to make it work. When Kim and Jimmy hired Stephen Ogg's character, they mentioned that they had written that scene for a different actor who wasn't available, so they had to adjust it. I think that would have been Patrick Kubi's introduction in the Better Call Saul timeline, but Bill Burr wasn't available to take the job. Beyond that, I can't think of anybody essential to Saul's story, but let me know in the comments who you'd like to see, even if it's a really minor Breaking Bad character that they haven't used. And so the biggest question is what's going to happen between Jimmy and Kim. I did a whole video of the possible outcomes as far as Kim not being in the story anymore. Not much has changed. I guess the idea of her getting arrested for whatever they plan to do to Howard looks a lot more possible. Also, she might be of use to Lalo in whatever plan he hatches. It seems like the actors in interviews point to this idea that we don't really know Kim's backstory quite a lot. It could be that they're generally interested in that in the same way that we are. You can't imagine that they would be throwing it out there if it was something they knew for certain. But they do know more about these characters than we do from portraying them. So I think we will be learning a lot more about that in season 6, but it's hard to say if that has an impact on how she's going to leave. I'm really glad that they decided to make Howard the target of this. It keeps that side of the story alive. One of the best things that season 5 did was bring all the stories together, and when she quit Mesa Verde, it almost felt like the lawyer side of the story was just not going to be important anymore. Plus, Howard keeps the connection with Chuck in the mix, and Jimmy's inability to deal with his death. Even though his latest trauma from the shootout has taken center stage, Chuck's death still haunts Jimmy. Howard being in the story keeps that viable as a pressure point for him. So I'm glad that's there, and I'm definitely curious to see what they cook up. And for Kim, I'm curious to know how long she's been thinking about doing something like this. I don't think she's trying to scam Jimmy out of the money. That's something I saw a lot of in the comments, that people thought that she was playing a long game. That seems like a little bit of a stretch, but what's great about where we're at right now is we really don't know. For 4 seasons, the mystery was, how does this guy Jimmy McGill, who is generally good-hearted, but is also a con man, who even when he tries to play it straight has a propensity to cut corners and bend the rules, how does this guy become no ethics style Saul Goodman? Now the mystery is much more about Kim, who she is, where's she coming from with this new direction, and how is it going to be the wedge that gets between them? Or is it just going to be a temporary setback? Is what they're getting into now with Howard, is that just going to sideline the relationship? We do have that mention of a phone call that Saul talks to Francesca about in that flash forward to the Breaking Bad timeline. So they may have to split up, whether she's on the run, whether she's locked up, and if that's the case, then there's always a chance they might come back together. Obviously, a lot of people want to see that happen in the Gene timeline. And you know what's crazy is that we are going to find out. This is the last season coming up, and I do think they're going to answer those questions. So let me know what your questions are in the comments. We probably have some time to kill between now and when the next season comes out. So what are you thinking about? What do you want to see happen? Please like this video if you enjoyed it. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Thanks for watching. I'll talk to you soon.